I just got back from my vacation in Phoenix, where I went to my niece's bat mitzvah and my sister Lori's memorial. So it was a pretty good trip, all in all things considered. But one of the things that God's been laying on my heart is to put down on video my full extended testimony about everything that He's brought me through, and I'm trying to do that now. I don't like sitting here talking to a computer, but it is what it is. I was born in Phoenix to two people who struggled with addiction, two addicts. My mother was a legal secretary, and my father, he worked as a printer at a print shop, and he loved printing. My dad had one daughter from a previous marriage named Lori. She was the one that died. And my mother had two kids from a previous marriage, my brother Kane and my sister Jasmine. And so when they got married, we were all living in a place in Glendale that we refer to as the house. I called it the house because that's the only real place that we were a family, or we were all together as a family. I'm just going to do a lot of air quotes, I guess. We lived there. We had a lot of fun. We had a lot of laughter, and we had a lot of chaos. A bunch of family drama, because every now and again, Kane and Jasmine would, they'd go see their dad, and Lori would go see her mom, and it would just be me hanging out with my parents, going like, "What's the deal? How come I don't get to go to? I don't get to do things with people." I remember being a kid. I remember being 3 years old. That's as far back as my memory goes. And one of my first memories was being taken over to my grandma and grandpa's house in Tempe, and they lived in a townhouse. And outside there was this big green tree, and I learned what death was because my mom was taking me in the house, and I saw this bird lying on the ground, just still and dead. It was like a crow, It was I asked why I wasn't moving, and my mom, she told me. She says the bird is dead, and she explained what death was. It's not coming back. It's done. Its life is gone. And I remember it. I remember it vividly, because we went over to my grandpa's, and he used to take us to feed the ducks, and we'd get bread, and we'd go over to Kiwanis Park, and we'd throw bread at ducks. And it'd usually be my brother my brother and Jasmine, and it was a really, really fond memory I have. And I remember not too long after that bird incident that my grandpa, he died. We'd gone over there, and every time I would come through the door, I'd run he used to sit in the same lazy boy recliner that was made in like the 70s or something. And every time I walked through that door, he was in that chair, and I'd always run to him, and I'd say, "Grandpa," and then he'd give me hugs and everything. But I came through the door that day, and I said, "Where's Grandpa?" And they said, Grandpa died. And my mom says I looked up to her and I said, "Like the bird?" And she says, "Yeah, like the bird." And I lost it. I just I knew exactly what that meant as a young kid. And I began crying. And and dealing with the loss of that. As a really young kid, I always understood death. We lived in that house in Glendale for a while. My parents started fighting. They started having real problems because the nature of addiction. My mom was trying to get clean and sober, and she wanted that for my dad. She knew she needed to get clean and sober for the kids, and she needed to change her life because they were addicts. And there was a time where my dad's dealer nearly beat him to death on the front lawn, and so that was kind of a wake-up call to my mom that something needed to change. So my mom started going to Narcotics Anonymous meetings and Alcoholic Anonymous meetings, and she took my dad, and they went to meetings, and my dad lasted about 3 months in the program before he relapsed, and he kept having problems with sobriety, and he started having problems with people telling him how to live his life. He needed to do it on his terms. So they fought a lot. It wasn't uncommon to walk into the living room and have them yelling and screaming at each other. And there was one time I came in, and we had this long bar that separated the serving bar that separated the kitchen from the dining room, and there'd always be stacked full of dirty dishes or whatnot, and they were fighting, and they were screaming at each other. And my dad, his hands were animated, and he was just yelling, he's screaming, and he's just kind of waving his hands around like that. And he in his excitement, in his excited state, he knocked over a dish off the counter, and it broke. And my mom, she said, "Yeah, that's real good, Mike, real good." And so she just threw all the rest of the dishes against the wall. She just cleared the bar. And I was just a young kid, and I'm watching my parents, throw dishes at each other. And so I ran and hid in my room, under my bed, just because, that's what kids do. They run and hide. And I was crying, and they didn't come in. They didn't stop fighting. But my older brother, Kane, he came in, and he tried to comfort me. Let me know that, things would be all right. We'd previously started going to this church called The Way. And when, in the brief periods where my dad was trying to be sober, we were trying to clean up, trying to go to church. And that was probably the first notion of God that I had gotten. But it was weird, because I've always been a smart kid, not to sound conceited or anything, but I've always been a smart dude. And I remember being a kid, and we'd be in church, and they'd dismiss us for children's church or Sunday school or something like that. And I never wanted to go to Sunday school because it was just weird. We'd be sitting in a room, and they'd be talking about unleavened bread. So as a teaching example, they got a bunch of biscuits, and they only, I guess, baked them part of the way and then fed them to everybody. And I'm like, I'm just eating dough. This is stupid. This is gross. This isn't teaching me anything. And mind you, I'm 4 or 5, and then we'd do arts and crafts and stuff, and they had us making those God's Eye things, and you can Google it. It's 2 popsicle sticks and then a bunch of yarn, And I remember as a kid, like, thinking, if this is the eyes of God, God is a weird looking dude. Like, this is some creepy stuff. And so I didn't want to go to kids' church. So they'd dismiss us for kids' church, and I'd walk, and I'd just kind of slip back into the seat, slip back in, sitting with my folks and everything. And I remember being with my brother in like the living room of our house, and he's trying to tell me about God. And he's like, yeah, God's, he's really powerful, and he just, he's in control of everything. And I was like, oh, so he moves us around like robots, like he's in control of our lives? And I was like, well, not quite, I'm 5 and my brother's 7 years older than me, so we're both trying to like hash out what any of that means. But my parents divorced. And or they separated first, and that got a little rough. My mom was attending meetings, and she was trying to take her sobriety seriously. She was trying to get clean. She was trying to become something stable for us kids and herself. And my dad, he moved into an apartment that my mom had got him, a nice apartment in an apartment complex, where I'd stayed with Lori and him for a little bit, and then I'd go over to my mom's, and she lived in a trailer. Started dating a guy named Dana. Dana was crazy. He had severe psychosis, and he believed that he was Jesus Christ in his second coming. But I liked him. I liked him because he was nice when he thought he was Jesus. He was really calm and mellow when he thought he was Jesus. When he was on his meds and was Dana, he was kind of a jerk, and I didn't care for that. He was really mean and kind of, I don't know, had a bunch of fortune cookie wisdom that didn't amount to crap. But I digress. Dad eventually left that apartment, and he moved into an abandoned house that a friend of his owned. It was this run-down, condemned building, a house in a neighborhood, that it didn't have a doorknob. It didn't have, We had a giant rope tied in front, so it looked like a doorknob from the street. But it was literally a condemned house, and there was roaches. It was gross. Just imagine a crack house with no crack. That's where I was living. Before that time, when my parents were still together, we had a babysitter. This is an important part of the story that, I get my chronology all screwed up, my timeline. One of these days I'll just sit down and write out a timeline, but that's beside the point. We had a babysitter, and Mom would drop me off at the babysitter, and Kane and Jasmine and I think Lori sometimes, they would come over after school. But I'd get dropped off there, and the babysitter had a daughter and a son, and that house was all kinds of unholy. There was about every kind of abuse that you can think of happening in that house. The daughter, she used to lock me in the hampers and for hours on end. She tried to claw out my veins, and I've got scars on my wrist from where she dug her nails in, trying to claw out my veins. And every time she'd scratch me, or every time she'd punch me, or every time she'd just lock me in something for hours. And I told her mom. Her mom would tell her, she would punish me, and she'd say, "Don't make up lies about my daughter," because I could be standing there with blood running down my hand, and she'd just say, "Don't make up lies about my daughter." if you're one of those parents that just always naturally believe everything that your kid says, you're doing them a disservice. Sure, trust your kids, but everybody goes through a time where they need to learn how that lying is wrong, and they're not going to do that if you believe everything they say. I've got scars. Sometimes kids suck. So, yeah. My mom would drop me off at the babysitter's, and I'd be crying, and I'd just be like begging her not to leave me there. And she just thought it was just regular separation anxiety, and she was trying to get clean. She didn't put two and two together, didn't realize what was going on. And there have been people that said that she should have. Maybe she should have, I don't know. But she didn't. I'd be crying, and she'd get in her car to drive away. And I'd just run down the street after her car as she was driving away. And sometimes I'd chase her for like 2 blocks, I'd just running after the car, screaming like, don't leave me here. So that was pretty messed up. I'm gonna laugh at my own pain here. That was a really messed up thing, but her son did a different type of abuse. I don't want to go into that. Just that there was abuses there. The mom did a lot of psychological abuse, like telling me, "Hey, you ready for lunch?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm ready for lunch. I'm hungry. I'm starving. I haven't eaten anything all day." "No, I'm not going to give you lunch." And like, "Oh, okay. I'll just sit over here and be hungry." Eventually, I stopped going to that babysitter. I think Dad just kind of like, I think he started paying attention. He's like, my kid's always getting like scratches and scars, and something's not adding up. And so I think in his mind, all he thought was that it just wasn't a very good babysitter. So he said that enough was enough, and then we stopped going there. So we're living in this house. We're living in this house with with no doorknob. My room doesn't have electricity at all. If I needed to see something, I had this old army flashlight that I just shined at the ceiling to get the reflective light to see where I was going to get to bed and whatnot. We didn't have a lot. I had some blocks. I had some Ninja Turtles. I had a lot of Ninja Turtles. That was good stuff. My dad was dating a woman named Barbara, who had a daughter named Aya, and he spent some time over there, and they spent some time over in our crappy little, shack. My dad started getting heavy into Native American culture because on the one hand he found it fascinating, but on the other hand he also knew that he could get some kinds of drugs there as part of the ceremonies. And so we'd spend time at sweat lodges, on the reservation, and what have you. Back at Fort McDowell, before there was anything out at Fort McDowell, it was just a McDonald's and a casino. And, I remember one time we went out to Arby's, because back then they had the 5 for $5 deal, and my dad couldn't cook. He was a terrible cook. He would try and invent things like, hey, let's put this with this, and it would just turn out disgusting. It was gross. We went out to Arby's to get some roast beef sandwiches because it was cheap and it was easy. And when we came home, the entire bathroom roof had caved in. And that was just the kind of house we lived in. I remember one time, Mom had me, and we went to a meeting, and I'd be playing outside and everything, Sometimes there would be other kids at the meetings that I'd play with. Other times I'd just be chilling by myself. And Dad had showed up one night. He showed up to pick me up from this meeting. And they started fighting and they started arguing because my mom, she was mad at my dad. My dad was mad at my mom. And they'd each grabbed one of my hands and one of my arms. And my mom was saying, Jay's coming with me. And my dad said, no, my son's coming with me. So they began to pull me back and forth in like this tug of war, like pulling me with them. And I told them they were hurting me, like physically hurting me. And so they made me choose. They said, who do you want to go with? Which is a really messed up thing for anybody. Hey, choose a parent. Choose which parent you love more or want to be with more or whatever. That's not something you should put a kid in. But I picked my mom because she was going out to eat. And when I was given the choice to pick between my father and mother, I just picked onion rings. It's kind of messed up. I remember my father's face, just heartbroken when I didn't pick him. He was just so grieved, but he just let me go. Let's see, hang on. Where was I? I was, onion rings. Dad, sad. Yeah, that's where I was. So it wasn't long after that that Mom was moving out of state. She had some family that said that they'd help her out. My great aunt Carol. So she was moving to Santa Fe, New Mexico. I hate Santa Fe, New Mexico. So they were talking, and for whatever reason, my mom decided, like, hey, Jay needs his father. Jay needs to stick around. He needs to be with Mike. Even though my dad was crazy, at the time, he was just kind of doing this thing. They'd still been bickering back and forth, but they were doing kind of the joint custody thing in their divorce. Let me back up. There was things that happened before that. So Dad was dating Barbara, and Mom was getting engaged to Dana, and I think it was about somewhere in there. We had a family reunion on my dad's side up in New York, Rochester, New York. We were going up to see my grandpa Dominic, who lived up there. Us being poor, didn't have plane tickets, so we bought Greyhound bus tickets to ride the bus from Phoenix, Arizona to Rochester, New York. That was a rough trip. We started going, we were riding along. It stank. Everybody was weird. Some people just wanted to be left alone. Other people were rambling nonsense to themselves. And I remember we stopped at this one just stop so that people could stretch their legs, and the driver said that he was giving everybody a 10-minute break. 10 minutes. Which, there was a guy that he didn't have his shoes on, but he just grabbed his wallet, and he ran across the street to the Kentucky Fried Chicken because he had 10 minutes. After 5 minutes, the bus driver said, all right, everybody back on the bus. And my dad said, you said we have 10 minutes. And the bus driver said, no, I said 5-minute break. And this incensed my dad. He was mad. he was mad because people were getting on the bus, and the bus driver, he just closed the door and he started to take off. The guy at the KFC, he was running barefoot, trying to catch the bus. And my dad's telling the bus driver to stop, and he didn't stop. He just kept on driving. And so that guy just got left at a KFC. My dad was furious. He started, he started yelling at the driver, and he started talking to the passengers. He started he started a petition to get the driver fired. But so at the next stop, the cops were waiting for us. And they were talking to my dad and giving him the rundown. And basically, the options were you can sit there and be quiet and then take it up with the corporate headquarters as soon as you're done with your trip, or we can arrest you and just, take you off the bus for causing public disturbance or whatnot. So my dad bit his tongue. He waited until we got to where we were going, and he went into the corporate office, and I guess there was the family of the guy waiting there, and my dad, he just started laying into somebody. He's like, "You left that guy. That was wrong. And this guy should be fired. He told everybody 10 minutes, and this guy only had 5." My dad had a strong sense of injustice, I guess. At one of the terminals, there was this guy that approached us in the bathroom, and he had a joint in his hand, and he says, "Hey man, you want to hit?" Talking to my dad, and my dad was a pot smoker, and he did want to hit. And he paused because he almost started to reach for the joint, but then he looked at me and he said, "No man, drugs are bad." My dad was an addict, and he was offered free drugs, and he wanted free drugs, but he also wanted to set an example for me not to follow in those footsteps. He wanted me to be something better than him, something more. So we made it to New York. We had a family reunion. My dad met, I guess, his sister that he didn't know, he'd never met before. And I played chess with my cousin Pete, and he cheated. I punched him in the face. My dad pulled me aside. He says, "Why'd you hit Pete?" I says, "He cheated." He's like, "Oh, good." Oh man, that was a funny story. And Pete's a rocket scientist now. He's a big deal somewhere. I mean, good for him. I bet he stopped cheating at chess. I bet he just beats everybody at chess now. That's not even part of the testimony. What do you care about whether my cousin cheats at chess? Anyway. So we got back, My mom was moving out of state. Dana was still crazy. He was in psychosis, and he started traveling around proclaiming his false messiahship, him being part of the second coming. He even traveled to Israel, and on the plane they hit some really bad turbulence, and he went up and asked to talk to the pilot. And the pilot just joked. He was like, "Hey, is it you that's causing this?" And he said, "Yes, but don't tell anyone." This is on a flight to Israel. And so as soon as he landed, he was met by security that basically held him in a cell overnight and sent him back to the United States the next morning, because Israel doesn't want you people with your false messiahship proclaiming, pretending to be Jesus walking around in the land. That's gonna cause problems, Not that it went so great the first time. So that was kind of hard on my mom, because she loved him and was kind of tolerant. And he tried to see the Pope. He went to Mexico, drove to Mexico, sold his car in Mexico, and which you're not supposed to do, and then he just kind of walked back across the border, which was ridiculous. He was a weird dude. A lot of crazy stuff. They moved to New Mexico and they got set up. I was staying behind with Dad. We went to a sweat lodge one night, and I was playing with sticks in the fire. I was setting the tips on fire and then blowing it out and then writing my name in the air with the embers, like how they trace, And everybody else was in the sweat lodge. My dad came out and he grabbed a shovel to shovel more hot rocks into the pit. And he shoveled a few shovels in, and then he turned and he looked at me and he gripped his heart and he slumped down and he just kind of just slumped. And I tried to wake him up. It's not unlike the scene from The Lion King, I was sitting there trying to wake him up and he's not getting up. And I opened his eyes, like that. And they were rolled back in his head. And I knew something was wrong after the first couple of minutes. I couldn't, when his eyes were rolling back in his head. And so I poked my head in the sweat lodge and I said, "There's something wrong with my dad." And a couple of the guys came out and they're looking at him. And one dude just jumped straight in his car and he took off. He was going to a payphone to call 911, but the nearest payphone was the McDonald's, and we were out at Fort McDowell back when there was nothing there, so it was still another 30 minutes before the paramedics could arrive. So I was out there at Fort McDowell, 5 years old. No, I was 8 years old about then. 8 years old. My father just collapsed in front of me. My mom was in another state, surrounded by mostly strangers. The cops came. They took my dad, to the paramedics. Paramedics took him to the hospital. The cops asked me, where my family was. And I'm 8. I don't know. I don't know where they are. I think my mom's in New Mexico. She moved. So we're riding in the squad car to the hospital, or to the station, because they're trying to find somebody. I'm trying to find my mom to get a hold of her to figure out somebody to take me. As we were riding along in the squad car, a cop got a call on his cell phone. It was one of the original Motorola phones, not the giant brick, but the first flip phone where it was the little panel came down. The cop pulled out his phone and he answered it as he was driving. And he said, his face went white, and he said, "Jay, your father didn't make it. Your dad died." And the words, I soaked him in, and I started crying, and I was crying over the loss, but something just clicked, and I said, I started thinking about my granny. I started thinking about my mom, and thinking I can't cry. I got to be stronger for them. I don't know why I thought that they were weak. I got to be strong. They're going to hold it together because my 8-year-old self is going to be strong. But that's what I thought. So I cried for about 1 minute, about 60 seconds. I let the tears fall, and then I pulled it together. And that was it. They got a hold of the cops. The cops got a hold of my mom, and they were able to tell her what's up. My mom called my grandma, her mom, and Grandma came out to pick me up, at the hospital. Barbara met us at the hospital with Aya and everything, and Barbara, she stole my dad's wallet, and she grabbed it, and she took all the money out of it, and she came over to me, and she put it in my hand, and she said, "Take all this money. Take it. Because I don't want your Uncle Steve to steal it." So that act, I mean, that spoke volumes to me. Like, it was a real noble thing that I think she did in that moment. It was like an act of protection and an act of love and compassion, and a really, really turbulent moment, to acknowledge this belongs to you. She knew how my uncle was. So my grandma showed up to the hospital, and I went with her back to her house. My mom had a job interview the next day, and so she couldn't fly out immediately because she was trying to get herself established. My brother insisted that he come with us, or come with her. He says, "I'm coming down there." So a day later, somehow they worked it out. My mom caught a flight, and my brother caught a flight, and they both came down to get me. We went through the funeral, and everybody was crying. I wasn't crying. They were whispering. They're like, "It hasn't hit him yet. He just hasn't dealt with it yet. Hasn't processed yet." But I think somewhere in there I was just trying to be strong for everybody else. So my sister Lori arrived, and she was in complete hysterics. She was just melting. She was just crying and just sobbing uncontrollably. Some of her last words to Dad were calling him an adulterer and saying that she hated him because he was dating Barbara during the separation before the divorce was officially finalized. So she felt a lot of guilt and a lot of shame for that. And I think, to some degree, she somehow thinks that she killed him by saying that. She didn't. But I think she thought that. He was a veteran. He had a 21 gun salute and everything. He's buried in Veterans Memorial Cemetery in Phoenix. I moved to New Mexico with my family. What was left of my family. Lori went to live with her mom, and I didn't see much more of her after that. We had a little run-ins here and there where we'd try and connect. It didn't quite work out like that. My uncle, he petitioned the court to be executor of my father's estate, and the court said, "Okay, what I want you to do is I want you to allow the kids to go in and get everything that they want, and then everything else, sell it and split the money between the two." So my sister, she went in. She got the big ticket items. He had a nice telescope, and he had a mediocre TV, and she got that kind of stuff. And I went for stuff with sentimental value. I got I got his pocket knife. I got I got a little malachite rock that he gave me, and some other rocks that he had collected. Those kind of things. My aunt, she went in and she took his toolbox, which will come up later. Unbeknownst to me, she took his toolbox. So my uncle, he did that. He split everything. He sold everything and sold his motorcycle. Had I known that I could have taken the motorcycle, I would have taken the motorcycle. But he sold this Honda Shadow for like $500. Nothing. I would have kept that bike. I would have ridden that bike. So my uncle gave my sister her money, and then he kept mine. He kept part of my inheritance, you know. He tried to say that he wanted to put it into bonds or something that would benefit, but he pocketed it. He took the money. He stole my inheritance. It was kind of a really messed up thing. He's kind of a really messed up dude. But he is what he is. So I was living in New Mexico. I was dealing with my father's death and grief, and you know, I've had quite a bit of compounded issues up until this point. I was starting to act out when I'd lived in Phoenix. You know, when my parents split, I was having a lot of reactionary issues, behavioral health issues, because, well, everything was chaos. And so if everything was chaos and people were chaotic and nobody was playing by any kind of rules, then why would I play by any kind of rules? Why would I listen to you if you're telling me to do something if you don't listen to anybody? When I was about 5 or 6, you know, and my parents had split up, my mom was driving me to a therapist by the name of Diane. And Diane was a terrible therapist. And she told me, she's like, hey, there's a safe place. You can tell me about anything. It'll just stay between us. Go ahead and talk to me about whatever's going on. And I think I opened up a little bit about something. And then next thing I know, she called my mom in and told my mom everything that I had said. So I, 5, 6 years old, I knew I can't trust Diane. And so the following week, we were on our way to Diane's office, and I didn't want to go. I told her, I told my mom, I was like, I'm not going. I don't want to go. I want to go to Dad's. I want to, in my 6-year-old mind, I know all of Phoenix. I know the way to Dad's, even though I didn't. But we pulled up to a stoplight, and by my recollection, we had pulled up fully to a stop at the stoplight, and I went to get out of the truck because I was going to walk to Dad's house. What my mom saw was we were going 40 miles an hour down a busy street with multiple cars and traffic, and I opened the door to fling myself into traffic, and I tried to kill myself. So, when we got to Diane's office, and I'm locking the doors, I'm not getting out of the car, we're playing whack-a-mole where she's trying to unlock things, and I'm just relocking things, and it's just not working. And she tells Diane that I just tried to kill myself by flinging myself into traffic because I was upset and wanted my dad. I got put into a residential, or a behavioral health hospital where I was around other kids. I was having structure. I had people that would listen to my problems, that would listen to me, that I was getting attention that I wasn't getting anywhere else. I was getting 3 square meals a day, and they even had dessert if I ate all my fruit and vegetables. I was getting pie. It was like the Hilton. So what that did in my mind was tell me that when everything got so bad at home with the struggles and the pain, that all I had to do was push them far enough to put me in this place. All I had to do was act out enough, and then I could live in a better place for a little while. So the doctors, and the therapists, they were telling me, or they weren't telling me, they were telling my mom, like, we're not finding anything wrong with him. Like, he's a model kid. Like, he doesn't act out. He doesn't get angry. He doesn't cause any problems. Why is he in here? And my mom was telling him, it was like, he's a nightmare at home. He really has problems, And she told Diane to tell the therapist, push me. Just really do everything unfair, like just real injustice, like take away everything without cause, and see how he reacts. So they did. They pushed me and they pushed me and they pushed me and they provoked me, and they really set me on edge. And then I had this like really angry outburst where they had to lock me in the quiet room, and I'm tearing apart a mattress, just in this like really angry outburst of emotion, and I'm screaming and I'm yelling and I'm crying, and they're like, aha, but this is, my discharge papers had already gone through, so I was getting out of there like by the time that finally broke. And I'm not sure what exactly that really told them, because is it really some sort of some breakthrough that if you treat a kid like garbage for like a week and a half, and you push them around, and they're gonna get really mad and eventually just not cooperate anymore? Surprise? I don't know. So I'm in New Mexico. I'm 8. I'm going to school, and it starts to get rough because I'm the new kid in school, and I'm a white dude in school, and I'm surrounded by mostly Hispanic people, and they're starting to give me crap for being white. I got beat up. I was getting into fights. The people were just beating me up just because I was white, and they weren't. A lot of people they teach their kids the mentality that the white guy's the devil, and if you see one, he's the source of all your problems. So be sure to plan accordingly to deal with it. And so I was slipping into a pretty deep depression at that point. I'd watched my father die. I had compounded abandonment issues from my grandpa died. My parents left me at an abusive house, and driving away, and my brothers and sisters, they'd all just disappear for a while, and I'd be left behind. My parents divorced. My mom moved out of state. My father died right in front of me. It was just starting to stack and compound upon it, each other. It was just one thing after another, just beginning to build, instilling in me a sense of, I guess, self-reliance, abandonment issues, those kind of things. So I'm going through life in New Mexico. It's awful. Getting beat up a lot. Trying to make friends. It's going rough. Dana's in and out of the picture. Dana is in and out of the picture. My brother, he decided to run away. As soon as I got to New Mexico, and my father had died, and so I was trying to look up to some kind of male role model, like every Every child does. My brother and his own issues, he ran away. He was gone. He went back to Phoenix. And so that was another person that left in my life, you know. We eventually moved to a trailer park in Santa Fe. A racist Hispanic trailer park. I mean, I had one friend, and he wasn't a very good friend at that. But started dealing with a bunch of neighborhood bullies, you know. I was getting beat up. I didn't play basketball. Basketball's life in Santa Fe, New Mexico. There was two particular kids, David and Carlos, that they were terrible. Like, they'd beat me up a lot. One time I tried to hold a yard sale, and they hit across the street with BB guns, just shot everything that I had. And there wasn't, you know, what could I do, you know? They'd run, so wasn't a lot I could get done. I had one friend next door named Eric. Eric was a good dude. Eric Apodaca. Yeah, he was a cool dude. His family was cool. He was a little bit younger, and we'd play in the yard and play action figures. And his family used to take me hiking with him. He lived with his mom and his aunt. I don't know where his dad was, but they were kind of like family for a little while. I had a dog named Goliath that was he was a German Shepherd Akita mix, and he was probably my best friend for several years before Eric showed up. He was the best dog. He used to love to play fetch so much that he'd go out into the yard and he'd dig up rocks and bring them into the house just so you would throw them back outside, and he could kind of try and trick you into playing fetch. Which was funny because there was a time I was walking him, and I'm walking him down the street, and Carlos thought it would be a good idea to throw rocks at me at that moment. So he picked up a rock and he heaved it at me. He just chucked it. And Goliath jumps like 9 feet in the air, and he catches this rock in his teeth. And then his instinct is to return the rock so that Carlos can throw it again. But all Carlos knows is that he just picked up a rock and threw it at my face. My dog leapt through the air, caught it, and is now running full speed at him. And so I'd never seen anybody run as fast as Carlos did in that moment. Like, he was just full on, just tearing out of there. And so that was pretty funny. So I was getting beat up in school a lot, and my mom, she was always telling me, like, hey, you know, go through the proper channels, go through the system, tell the teacher. And so I'd tell the teacher, and the teacher wouldn't do anything. The teacher never did anything. I'd get beat up even more for even trying to snitch, which was a life lesson. Sometimes you got to take things into your own hands, which I did eventually. But that's another thing. I'll get to that. Severe depression. I remember sitting in third grade class just feeling the weight of life and death and existence as they're trying to teach us spelling and basic math. When I was a kid living with my dad, you know, I was really smart, and I was tested a couple times for being gifted, and I made the honor roll. And when he died, so did my confidence, and so did my attention span, and so did my desire to really try for anything. So I'm sitting there in third grade class, and they're trying to teach us stuff, and all I can think is, like, you know, we have the numbers for a coup d'etat. We could mount an insurrection. Like, there's more of us than there is of the teacher, and it would be easiest for it to take control. But it will never work because I can't unify these idiots. That was an actual thought that I had in third grade. I was like, it'll never work because Cynthia over there is weak and she'll she'll buckle. I swear I'm not a sociopath. I just wanted to be left alone, I had a lot of pain and I just wanted to be left alone. So I'm going through troubled school life, going through troubled home life. My brother's gone. My sister and I fight. My mom doesn't know what to do with me because, she's working and I'm acting out. And so I pushed and I'd act out a lot so that they'd check me back into a mental health place. They put me back in the hospital. They put me in a place where, again, getting dessert. I'm having arts and crafts. I'm working with clay. That's cool, I'm drawing pictures. I'm painting things. I'm going on cool outings with other kids my age. I'm making friends. And nobody's hurting me in this hospital, I was doing what I thought I needed to do to, survive, I guess. And I did that for a while, back and forth, and after a while, I think it was about, when was it? I was 12. And, I'd been seeing counselors and in and out of counseling, and I was never really doing much because every time I was in with a counselor, they'd start to scratch the surface. It took a while to build some kind of trust, and once they built like just the tiniest shred of trust, they'd start to scratch the surface of just some of the things that I've survived, the things that I've endured. And when they did, I just got a phone call, so I don't know what it was I was just saying. Where was I? I'm going to figure this out. That's what I was saying. So I was in therapy, and every time I tried to scratch the surface of anything, I'd get passed off to another therapist. Every time I built some trust with somebody, I'd have an insurance problem, or they'd get a different job, or they'd move out of state, or there would be some kind of conflict of interest. So I was being passed from therapist to therapist to therapist without ever really establishing trust or what have you. Some of those therapists, they just wanted to push pills on me. They never really wanted to get to the heart of the issues, the heart stuff, the abandonment, the abuse, the trauma that comes from seeing so much death. It's so fast. The instability, the issues of having addict parents, the loss, the separation from siblings, that's a lot of stuff. All they saw was just, depression. Just depression. That's it. This kid's depressed. Why is he depressed? I don't know. Give him pills. So they prescribed medications for me, They had antidepressants and, they had stuff for, side effects. And then they gave me other pills for the side effects of those side effects. And so I was taking just a handful of pills, just medicate the problem away. Numb it. Numb the emotions. Numb the receptors of the brain that really allowed any kind of cognitive function. So I was prescribed a bunch of medications. They said that, this kid's got manic depression. This kid's he's depressed. And, he's got some behavioral issues, he's psychological problems. It's like, no, my problems were they weren't chemical imbalances. They weren't psychological, things. It was issues that were unresolved. They were behavioral stuff stemming from hurts and pains that I needed to work through, that I needed to understand, and I needed to overcome. I needed healing in. But it was what it was at the time. So I bounced in through and out of a couple more of those behavioral health, mental health hospitals until I was 12. And when I was 12, my mom was at her wit's end. She didn't know what else to do. So we were living in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and there was this place in Cedar Crest, New Mexico, called the Via Santa Maria. And that was long-term residential treatment. And that was one step below juvenile hall. It was really kind of the last stop where you either shape up or you're gonna end up in jail. I spent 9 months in the Via Santa Maria with people with real deep issues, with real emotional problems, the people with real behavioral problems that weren't getting ironed out. It was not the Hilton. It was not fun. I was getting 3 square meals a day, but it was also a lot of running, a lot of chores, a lot of structure that I wasn't familiar with. You know, everything was planned out. My day was monitored from start to finish. It was not fun. It was to the point where I realized that I couldn't keep checking out to the hospital to get away from my family and my problems. I couldn't run anymore. It was something that broke me out of that because that road had been run. Seven months into my stay at the Via Santa Maria, my family packed up and they moved to Michigan without me. I still hadn't resolved any of the abandonment or the loss or anything, but they'd packed up and they moved without me. And so as soon as I got out of the Via Santa Maria, they just kind of drove me to the airport and put me on the plane, and I moved to Michigan. It's really messed up to just leave a kid behind, you know, to just kind of, okay, well, we're going to do our thing and forget about your well-being and your health and your abandonment issues. We're just going to go. You can catch up with us later. Yeah, that was rough. I had issues, you know, in the time of bouncing in and out of hospitals. I also would fly back to Phoenix to stay with my granny and visit, you know, my aunt. We all were pretty dramatic. We were pretty, we're Italian, so that's a thing. They had their own. My aunt was she was the kind of lady that had a career in falling down in Walmart and suing them. So that was the kind of stock that I was accustomed with. They were kind of the buy your affection type. Like, I'm going to tell you I love you by just giving you money or showering you with gifts. And she did love me, but that wasn't the way to do it, you know. There was one time with my aunt when I was down there for a visit, and I was staying with my aunt and my granny. They always lived together. There was a severe codependent thing going on where my granny was horrendously manipulative, and my aunt was just in a constant struggle for her affection and approval. So they would just feed off of each other in this dysfunctional symbiosis, and it was a thing. I was down there visiting one time as a kid, you know, and I remember going to Walmart with my sister Lori and my Aunt Dina, and this is back before they really had the quality control loss prevention that they do now. My aunt went and she put a giant trash can in the shopping cart, And, she pushed it around for a little bit, and she filled up the trash can full of stuff with, a giant thing of Legos and everything and whatnot. And she just packed it full of things. And then when she got to the checkout, she only paid for the trash can. It was just, she was like, "Oh, this is too big to put on a conveyor belt. Can you just scan it?" And so they scanned it. They didn't check inside the trash can at that point. And she had just, she had like $100 worth of stuff in there. Actually, she had Legos in there, so it was probably like $200 worth of stuff, because Legos have always been expensive. And I saw it, and I knew it was wrong. And I said something to my granny, and I said, they didn't pay for that stuff. And my granny, she would encourage that kind of behavior normally, but the fact that I had said something and she wanted me to never, to know no wrong, she wanted me to be better than everyone else. She came down really hard on my aunt and kicked her out of the house for the time, and I was staying on a fold-out couch, and there was a sliding glass door just kind of straight on back from where I was trying to sleep. And my aunt came back, and she was just screaming, and she was crying, and she's just yelling, and she's just banging on the glass, and she's screaming, and my granny's like, "You know what you did, now leave." Even though, she'd encouraged that kind of behavior had I not been aware of it. And so my aunt is just, I'm trying to fall asleep, and my aunt is just like looking me in the eyes from across the way, and she's screaming at me. She's like, "I didn't do it. I didn't do anything. I didn't do it. This is wrong. I didn't do it." She did it, but she's just screaming at me and just yelling and banging on the glass. So she went somewhere that night and left a voicemail on my granny's machine that she was going to kill herself. She was going to take a bunch of pills and those kind of theatrics. She wasn't really suicidal. She just wanted the attention. She wanted to make Granny suffer for calling her out. Like, she felt pain, so she wanted somebody else to feel that kind of pain. And that was kind of the dynamic that I was dealing with. And it was tough, because that weight fell on me as I pointed out the right thing, and it resulted in my aunt feigning suicide. And it resulted in my granny just throwing her out of the house. And this grand display of, theatrics. And I carried that with me for a while. I mean, it was messed up. It was crazy stuff. Where was I? Via Santa Maria. So they put me on a plane, and I go to Michigan. I get off the plane, and we're living in the racial divide in Grand Rapids between the black neighborhood and the super poor white neighborhood. My next door neighbor, Stefan, he's a black guy. He was my friend. And we had another friend named Darren, and we'd mill around town doing stupid hood rat stuff. Throwing snowballs at people and houses and stuff. And there was one time Darren and Stefan and I were walking down the street, and let me back this up. My mom and Dana eventually divorced. They got married, they got divorced, and my mom went to an NA convention in Phoenix where she met Walt, and they hit it off, and Walt came up for a visit while I was in one of the residential treatment things, and they asked me, like, "Hey, you think it's okay if Walt moves in?" And I'm like, "I don't know. He's got a cowboy hat. He seems kind of cool. He's playing catch with me. I've known this guy for 10 minutes. Sure, yeah, why not? Let's have him move in with me. Those kind of. I don't know who says to a kid like, "Hey, make this life decision." You're you're about 9. Yeah. Are you okay with this stranger who's just being nice to you for 4 minutes moving into your house? Yeah, let's just make all our decisions like that. But they were dating for a long time, and they moved to Michigan, and so I was walking around with Stefan and Darren. We're walking down the street one time, and we stop at a payphone because there was a code you could punch in and then hang up the phone, which would cause it to ring back. And for some reason, this was a thing that made us laugh, and we just liked doing it. And as I'm messing around with the payphone, 2 dudes on a bike were riding by, and one of them kicked me in the butt. One was on the handlebars. One of them kicked me in the butt, and I turned around and I called him a name. And apparently Stefan and Darren knew that kid, and they knew that he was someone not to be messed with. And so I'm thinking in my mind, there's 2 of them, 3 of us, we got this. I'm thinking I have safety in numbers. So as these guys get up in my face, I turn around, and Stefan and Darren, they kept walking. They just kind of left me behind. They kind of just ditched me, and I'm like, well, crap. So next thing I know, those 2 guys on a bike are now 4 guys because, people are just starting to come out of the woodwork because they see something going on. So the guy tells me, he says, empty your pockets. Give me all your money. And I'm like, I don't have any money. So, we're standing there, and 4 is now 7 people. People are just coming out off of their patios and porches and everything. Just kids just out of the neighborhood, and they're just, I'm becoming surrounded. And I'm looking over, and I look over at the porch just right across the street, and there's just two adults just sitting there watching me get mugged. Man, this is just a regular Tuesday, This is life. Look at that white kid getting his stuff taken. And so as soon as I looked around, he said, don't look at them. They can't help you. And he says, empty your pockets. So I emptied my pockets. I didn't have anything but some keys, a keychain. And he looks down and he says, give me your shoes. And I says, I'm not going to give you my shoes. So he punches me in the face. So as soon as he punched me in the face, I just took off running. And I was running down the street, and I look over my shoulder, and I kid you not, there's 16 people chasing me. One of them on a bike. They're just running after me. Little did I know, I was about 3 or 4 blocks from home, and I knew that if I could get to home, I'd be safe. And I'm running full sprint, and I'm running as fast as I can, and I'm being chased by this mob. I didn't know that Darren and Stefan had doubled back, and they got my stepdad, and I thank God for that. And it's something that I'll always thank Walt for, As I was running and I was running and I was running, and I couldn't run anymore. I couldn't breathe anymore. My lungs felt like they were being filled with fire, and I was just, I knew that I was about to just be beaten senseless, and there was an element of danger. I could have died. I could have died because I'd been out of breath and then just being curb stomped. As I was running, there was people getting groceries out of their car, and I'm screaming. I was like, "Help me! Help me! I'm being mugged." And I'll never forget that somebody just looked at me and they just started laughing. That in this moment of this terrifying moment of me, literally running for my life and crying out for help, they just looked me right in the face and just laughed. That my pain was amusing to them, my suffering brought them joy, and that was a moment of evil that I confronted, that I was in, I guess. I turned a corner about a block and a half from home because I couldn't run anymore. I was about to just fall over. And there was my stepdad holding a baseball bat, and as soon as I looked over my shoulder, just everybody just started to disperse. And that was one of the moments that I knew that I never wanted to be defenseless again. I never wanted to be in a situation where I couldn't defend myself. Not long after that, I was hanging out with my friend Steve. Steve was an idiot. He was just so dumb. I don't know why I hung out with Steve, but he was a moron. He really was. And I bought a pocket knife off of him, and I kept it. I kept it for protection. It's like I'm not going to be in that situation where I have to be a complete and helpless victim again. I don't want that. Steve and I decided to ride our bikes to Myers, the grocery store, a couple blocks away. We didn't have any money. We had enough money for maybe some gum, but it was summer and we were bored. We had nothing to do, so we rode our bikes to Myers, and we were looking, just browsing around. They had free samples of. They had little tiny travel-sized shampoo bottles samples. For shampoo. I don't know who gives a shampoo sample at a grocery store, but they did. So Steve took a couple bottles. He's like, hey, free shampoo. So we're riding back, and Steve stops at the overpass and is like, I don't know what you're doing, but come on, let's go. And so I just keep coasting downhill. And I found out later that Steve was throwing shampoo off the overpass. And all of a sudden, Steve comes speeding up beside me on his bike, and he says, hey, I'll race you to the park. And I was like, okay, we're doing something. This is fun. So we start taking off when all of a sudden this car with just white crap smeared across the windshield cuts us off. And guy hops out of his car, and he's mad, and he's yelling, and he's pointing at us. And then he flags down a cop, and a cop pulls over. And Steve just been up there just squirting shampoo off the overpass. So they're patting Steve, they got Steve up against the car and they're patting him down. He's like, you got any knives or weapons or anything? And they're talking to Steve, and I'm just standing next to him, and I'm trying to be a good dude. And I was like, I pull out my pocket knife. I was like, I have this knife. And the guy looks at me, he's like, give me that. And he takes my knife, and they put us both in the back of the patrol car, and Steve is just freaking out. He's like, my parents are going to kill me, my family's going to kill me, and I'm still trying to figure out what's going on. I was like, why? Steve, calm down. What's happening? And he's like, he's just flipping out. He just knows that he did something wrong. And they called up my stepdad, and my stepdad came down. They told him, they're like, well, it doesn't seem like Jay really knew what was going on, but he was part of this thing where they were throwing shampoo off the overpass, so we're going to give him a warning, but we're keeping the knife. I tell that story because it segues into this one. So, a couple weeks later, I'm in middle school. I'm in a class, and I'm riding the bus, and I got this English class with this guy named Ray. And Ray used to always stab people with glittery gel pens, the type, the sparkly ones with the little silver tip and the clear and the cap that goes on. In English class, he'd always be stabbing people, and he rode my bus, and he'd always be stabbing people, and I was rapidly approaching the point where I was done taking crap from people. I was done dealing with people's nonsense. And, I'd still taken all that advice from my mom. Just go through the proper channels, tell somebody needs to intervene, appeal to authority, I guess. And so I went to my English teacher, and I said, hey, this kid stabbed me with a gel pen. You need to do something. You need to take action. And she's like, I didn't see it. There's nothing I can do. I have to see it in order to do something, because it's just kind of your word against his. And so I went to my English teacher, and I said, hey, this kid stabbed me with a gel pen. You need to do something. You need to take action. And she's like, I didn't see it. There's nothing I can do. I have to see it in order to do something, because it's just kind of your word against his. I'm like, okay, that's BS, but we'll roll with that. So we're on the bus the next day, and Ray starts stabbing me with gel pens. He starts jabbing me, and so I stole one. I took one. It was a pink glittery gel pen. I think that's why he didn't really put up too much of a fight to get it back, because he didn't want the pink one. Now, my stepdad at the time was something of a hoarder, so we had a basement full of just garbage and various trinkets and odd ends and doodads in jars and in coffee cans along shelves in the basement. So I went home and I took this pink glittery gel pen and I took it apart. And I was in the basement and I was rummaging through things. And I found a compass. The kind for, drawing circles. Not finding north, but the kind for drawing circles. I dismantled the pen and I took the compass point and I snapped it off. And I jabbed it into the ink portion and I melted it together. And so I screwed the pen all back together so it looked like a regular pen, except it had this much of a point on it. And when you put the cap on, it poked through the end and it just looked like a regular pen with a little silver tip. So here I was in 8th grade. I made a shiv. I took it to school the next day, and Ray was playing it cool in the in English class because he didn't want to get busted. He didn't want to get caught, and so he was pretending like nothing had ever happened. But when we got on the bus, it was a different story. There was less supervision. And Ray was he started setting it in, he started stabbing me with a gel pen. Or he was about to stab me with a gel pen. And I told him, I looked at him and something finally clicked with me. And I looked at him and I said, in a way that a man says something and you know that he means business, that he's not messing around, he's not bluffing. I looked him square in the eyes and I said, do not F with me today. And I know that he understood me. I know that he understood exactly what I was saying, and that there was this thing that clicked in his mind that said, I shouldn't do this. He's serious. This is going to go poorly for me. But then this other voice clicked in his head, because I could see it all in his face. This other voice clicked in his head as no, I've always messed with this guy, and he's never done anything. And if I stop messing with him now, then I just can't mess with him anymore. I'm going to mess with him. And so he tried to jab me with the gel pen, and I pulled out my shiv and I shanked him in the leg. I stabbed him right in the leg, and Ray just started screaming. And so the bus driver called me up and she said, give me the pen. And so I handed her a click pen, and she's like, no, give me the real pen. And around this point I started developing that sense that if I'm busted, I'm busted. I'm just going to own it. I'm going to own it, And so I gave her the real pen, and her eyes got wide, and she called the principal, she called everybody, the security. She flipped the bus around. We got kicked off the bus. They called her parents, and I had to explain how a couple weeks ago I got pulled over with a pocket knife, and now today I stabbed a kid with a homemade shiv, and what was going on in my life and how concerned my mom was. And so Ray got in-school suspension. I got in-school suspension. I got 3 days in-school suspension because you can't make a homemade shiv, bring it to a public school, stab a guy, and not get some kind of consequences. I got 3 days, Ray got a week. And so they locked us in an unsupervised room together where we shot rubber bands at each other and paper clips. And then as time went on, in that room, we kind of became friends. And he acknowledged that he was really impressed with the fact that I made a homemade shiv and stabbed him with it. So we became friends. Which is funny because fast forward to freshman year of high school, I'm sitting in biology next to a guy named Nick who thinks he knows everything, and Nick starts acting out and get up in my face, and he's wanting to fight. And I look at the teacher and I says, you need to do something about this. When Ray, who's been sitting in the back corner sticking a paper clip in his socket because he's a moron, just shouts out, do not mess with that kid because he will effing stab you. Ray was funny. But when I'd gotten to Michigan, and I knew that I couldn't act out anymore to be sent off to a behavioral health place. I couldn't check into the Hilton, so to speak. I knew that I had a lot of problems and that I needed to deal with. So I tried to give therapy its proper due, and I was still on medications. And it was about freshman year that I really felt like I felt numb. I felt slow, sluggish. I felt like I wasn't a person. I felt like the shell of a person. And I knew in my mind that if I was going to fight the things that were going on inside of me, in my heart and in my mind, if I was going to really overcome and if I was going to heal from it, I needed to do it with a clear mind. And I had times when I would, I'd missed medications and I'd experience withdrawal, and my family would be like, "Are you taking your meds?" And I'd be like, "No, I'm not." And they're like, "We can tell because you're kind of a terror. You're kind of real irritable mess." And but I knew that I needed to do this. And so I stopped taking my medication. And it was in February, and I had stopped taking my medication. I was cheeking them and I was flushing them. And for the first 2 weeks, my mom was like, "Are you taking your meds?" Because anytime I was bristly. Every time I had any pushback on anything, I was angry. I was obstinate. And she's like, "Are you taking your meds?" And I had to lie. And I was like, yeah, I'm taking my meds, Mom. Spitting them in the toilet, but I'm taking them. Had I had any more sense, I could have sold them. I could have sold them at school, but I didn't. I just flushed them. And so time went on, and once 2 weeks, 3 weeks, the withdrawal started to subside, and I started becoming in better control of myself. I was able to process my emotions. My mind was working like my mind again, with the edge, not the dull blade. I was going to therapy with the same therapist named Bonnie Beal. She was a good therapist. I sat in her office every week for the better part of 3 years, finally digging in and really dealing with a lot of my issues of abandonment and a lot of my issues of neglect and what have you, the family issues that I had gone through. It got to be about November, and I thought it was time to talk to my mom about the medications. I came in, she was sitting at the computer, and she was online, on America Online, and I said, Mom, I don't need these meds. And she says, I'm not having this conversation with you, Jay. I'm not having this conversation with you again. You know how you are without the meds. You know how irritable and angry and upset and how crazy you get without the meds. And I was like, Mom, I don't need the meds. And then she said the thing that unlocked it all for me. She says, look at how good you've been doing the past several months. And I told her, I says, I'm glad you said that, because, Mom, I haven't taken my meds since February. And in that moment, she was both proud and angry. Like, she was proud of me because, I took the initiative for my own well-being, and I made a decision, and I was overcoming. I was overcoming and healing and adapting, and I was prevailing against the things that were internally messing me up. And then she was mad because she's been paying for medications that whole time. Medications are expensive. And she's mad. She's like, this whole year, I've been paying for this stuff, and you've just been cheeking it and flushing it. And I explained to her, and I says, it kind of had to go this way, because every time I tried to have this conversation before, it would just get shut down, and I needed the proof to prove that I could do this another way. I needed the proof to show you that I'm all right without this stuff. That the issue's in the heart, So I'm about 15, 16 this time. I told you back when I was a kid that's when I first had the introduction to God, like the real first idea of God. And up until this point, I just kind of had a semblance of God. When I was in New Mexico, and I was 10 years old, and my brother, he had run away, but then he came back for a visit, like he was staying with us for a little bit. My brother had been saved. He got saved in an Assemblies of God church, because after a while he was living with my grandma. He had nowhere else to go. He was staying with my grandma, and my grandma had a stipulation. This is, if you're going to live in my house, you're going to come to church. You're going to live by my rules. So my brother, who had been angry at the world and dealing with all kinds of things and studying religion and searching for God through all kinds of various faiths and understandings, and he's reading the Necronomicon, he's reading the Quran, he's reading finally the Bible, and he's getting through it, and he's like, there are things here that don't make sense. And he's sitting in the Tempe First Assembly of God with Pastor Monty Sears, and he's shouting mid-sermon. He's asking questions and everything, and Monty, and grace and patience, has shut him down. He's saying, we'll talk about that right after the sermon. Just hang on to that. I'll be with you in a minute. Monty was pouring into his life and just kind of mentored him and discipled him a little bit. And then one day, by the prompting of the Holy Spirit, Monty had an altar call. And it was one of those altar calls that just kind of hung on for a really long time, where there was about 15 minutes where Monty just knew. He was like, no, today's the day that Cain's going to give his life to Christ. Don't stop until Cain gets up and he comes down to this altar. And Cain was like, I'm not going up there. I'm not doing it. And next thing he knows, like, he's still telling himself he's not going up there as his feet are shuffling one in front of the other down to the altar. And he surrendered. He gave his life to Christ. So I'm 10 years old, and he's showing up, and he's living with us briefly. And he tells me, he says, hey Jay, you want to go play football with some people tonight at a Christmas tree lot? And I'm like, no. But yes, I'm a sucker for quality time, and I miss my brother, and so I was like, absolutely, I'll go do that. But I hate football. I hate basketball. I'm not going to play these things. I don't run. So I get into the back of his car, and he starts telling me a story of a God that'll never leave you or forsake you. He starts telling me about this God, the creator of heaven and earth. He starts telling me about this Savior who's redeemed us from sins. He tells me of this God that loves me more than anything. And as I listen to it, and he says, if this is true, if such a God exists, I'll take him. And a lot of people are drawn to redemption of sins, and a lot of people are drawn to, forgiveness. But I was drawn to a God that will never leave me or forsake me. I was drawn to a God that is consistent, that doesn't change. In him is no shadow of turning. That's what drew me in. And that was important, because in my understanding of God and my understanding, like my experiences in life, if there could ever be something so consistent and something so stable, then I needed it. I still need it. I still cling to it. I still cling to him. And so he walked me through a sinner's prayer there, which really doesn't really have its basis in Scripture, but I digress. He asked me if I wanted to give my heart to Christ. And I says, yeah, I'll give it a shot. So we went to a Bible study and at this Christmas tree lot and everything, and that was my first encounter with God. So I'm up in Michigan as an adolescent, and I'm thinking, I need to go to church. I'm in high school. It's like, God is starting to call me, and he says, like, go to church. You need to go to church. And so there was one time I stayed up all night because I knew I wouldn't wake up in the morning. I stayed up all night, and I walked several blocks to a church that I'd seen on a couple blocks away. And I went in there, and it happened to be a Baptist church. And the man was preaching a sermon and everything, and he talked about baptism, so I got baptized. And I felt like I was just hanging on, I wasn't really like living the truth, but I was hanging on. I'd started dating a girl named Louisa. She said she was Catholic. I was trying to be Christian. We both had the overlap of Jesus, and so I was like, this works. Advice for life, never try and hammer that stuff together. If it's not compatible, don't try and make it fit, because you'll find out some skeletons that'll come tumbling out of the closet, and you're like, this does not work the way I thought it would work. She wasn't Catholic. She turned out to be Wiccan. I know because she said, I'm a Wiccan. And I said, what's a Wiccan? And she says that it's a witch. That she worships trees and nature and stuff. Where was I? I think it was Louisa. I had to do a wardrobe change. Oh yeah, she said she was a witch. She said she was, it's not compatible. My brother had come up, and with the sole purpose of, he was going to redeem everybody in Michigan and have them come down to Phoenix. Okay, I keep getting interrupted on this. I think I was just at Louisa. Louisa, she was a Wiccan, she was a witch. I found out what that was. My parents had already moved down to Phoenix, back to Phoenix without us, and my brother, he'd stayed behind for another 2 weeks trying to get me to, he was just holding out, praying his guts out, trying to get me to come down to Phoenix with him, praying that God would intervene in my life, intervene in my situation. And so that's when I found out Louisa was a witch. I found out that she wasn't Catholic, and I found out that, she had misinformed me. So I told her, I says, hey, we need to break up. And then I moved across the country with my brother back to Phoenix, Arizona. My folks had already got in place, set up, Walt and Mom, and they didn't have any room for me because they went from a 2-story house into a 2-bedroom apartment. So at 16, I was out on my own. I got a place with my brother, and we were just kind of doing our thing. Living, got a job. I had survivor's benefits from my father being in the military for a little while, which was helping me cover rent to an extent. And I was going to school, and I was working. And I'd stay out late and shooting pool until about 2 a.m. with with friends, and then I'd come home, get a couple hours sleep, and then go to school. For a little while. And then work became more of a heavy load, and I had to choose whether if I was going to support myself or stay in school. And so I dropped out. I dropped out about half a year or a semester shy of graduation, my senior year. Went and got my GED, tested really high on that. Tested in the top 98th percentile in the nation for stuff. Because I'm smart. I'm just not really motivated. I guess. I don't know. Whatever. So, moved back to Phoenix with Kane. We were going to Tempe First Assembly of God, the church he was saved at. I was getting pretty plugged into that church. I eventually started dating a girl there named Gracie. Gracie was going to ASU. We were dating for a little while, and then her scholarship was up, and she went back to Woodstock, Illinois, where she was from. We did the long distance thing for a while, talking, chatting it up. We only ever had one fight in the long distance thing, and it wasn't so much just the distance. It was she'd hung out with this guy named Zach, and she said, and she was telling me about her day, and like, yeah, we hung out and we listened to this sermon, and you know, it was pretty cool. You know, just had fun. And I knew, because a man knows, I knew that Zach was into her, and so I let her know. I said, hey, I just want to give you a heads up. Zach is into you. And her reaction was immediately defensive, and she says, why are you being jealous? And I said, I'm not being jealous. I'm letting you know that Zach is into you. I'm not worried about Zach. I'm worried about you leading Zach on. Like, he's got feelings for you. So be careful with that. Well, she's like, you're being jealous and it's being ridiculous. And so that was the only fight we ever had. We kept talking, things, you know, semi-serious, talking about the possibility of marriage, talk about me moving up there. And so I reduced my life down to 2 suitcases, and I hopped a plane, and I moved up there. I was going to be staying in their youth pastor's basement until I got on the feet. Pastor Neil Linwall, he's a guy, he's a good dude, he's an awesome guy. And 3 days after I moved up there, 3 days, we broke up. She broke up with me. I don't know if it was just that the relationship was easier because of the long distance. It wasn't really real. But then me moving up there made it really real because I was in state. I don't know. It was a thing. So there I was, I don't know, about 18 years old. I was, I was far from everybody I knew, living in a stranger's basement, and my girlfriend just broke up with me. Now I had some real supporting words from my grandma right before I left, and she she looked me in the eye and she says, "You're gonna go up there and you're gonna fall on your face and you'll be back within a month." I was like, "Thanks, Grandma. Thanks." So when Gracie and I broke up 3 days after my getting there, those words just kind of rang in my ears, and I was like, I can't go home. I can't go home yet. I've got to stick it out. I've got to stay here. So, heartbroken and crushed, I went to her church, and I became friends with some of her friends, and I didn't become become this guy that just, you just swept under the rug and just kind of blew away in the wind because I came up there and just like, oh, didn't work out. Time to just pretend like none of this ever happened. I'm not really that type. So I stayed up there for about a year. I was, hanging out with the pastor and going to church, working. And then one day I decided I wanted to come home. So I came back to Phoenix and got a place with my friend James, my roommate. He was like a brother to me. Him and I met in high school where, we were talking. We used to sit at the same table and talk about God and stuff. And when it came time for him to move out, him and I got an apartment like right out of high school. And right after that happened, he was living with his uncle and his dad and his brother and sister. And just as soon as we had started living together, I don't think it had even been a month. His dad went to jail and his uncle died, which meant that his sister and brother needed to go somewhere, and his sister went with my brother and lived with their house, and his brother came to live with us. So here I was right out of high school, kind of in this something of a father figure type scenario where, I'm about 18 years old, and James is about 18 years old, and we're trying to, take care of this kid that's 5 years old, So I had to figure out some things about parenting just because I lived with this kid, and I was something of an authority in his life. So that was a thing. I don't know. Maybe I'll watch this video and find out how many times I said or that was a thing. That was a thing. Whatever. But it was strange, It was we were going to church and whatnot. So I've been doing this for 2 hours and I'm getting tired of telling the story. I've had to stop and start and repeat myself several times because I forgot where I was at. We were attending Tempe First Assembly of God. I started to have questions. I was working at a Circle K gas station and I was reading my Bible and I was having questions that started coming up, like, why don't we keep the Sabbath? Like, fourth commandment, why don't we do that? Why don't we do that the way it said? What about all these scriptures and all these commands that are in there? Like, why is it that we eat pork and shellfish and those kind of things, but it says not to in Leviticus? What's the reason for that? And when I'd ask this to pastors and people and staff, they'd give me the answers and, Christ did away with that, or things changed, the law changed, something. And it never made sense, but I always just assumed, I put more faith in the understanding the truth in the future than I did in their answers. Like, okay, there's a spiritual principle that I'm not getting that I'll figure out as I grow and mature in Christ, which technically was true. That it didn't make sense, and the principle was consistency. And as I matured in Christ, I understood consistency and the Scripture over doctrine. That there are certain doctrines that didn't line up with the integrity of Scripture. So the very nature of my attraction to God and to Christ, about them not changing their mind, their never leaving or forsaking, was the avenue in which I was introduced to the Torah. That God didn't change his mind about what is clean and unclean. God didn't edit out those scriptures. God didn't change his his law, because if he can change his law, if he can change his mind, he can undo anything he's ever done. All those promises he said, I will never destroy the earth with a flood, or I'll never leave you and forsake you. If he can just change his mind on that, he can just say, you know what, I've decided not to save anyone. I've decided that my death and resurrection is now meaningless because I've chosen not to redeem anyone. What's to stop him from doing that? Nothing. If we undo who God is and his integrity and his steadfastness and his truth, if we undermine that, then what's to separate him from the imaginary idols and the made-up pagan gods? Nothing. There's nothing. He becomes just another fable, just another Greek god, just some story that has elements of morality and peril and drama and theatrics. And our God isn't like that. Our God is real. The God of the Bible is real. Israel. Israel. So I showed up to a congregation. It was at that time called Am Segula, and it was being taught by Boaz Michael of First Fruits of Zion. And we attended that congregation, and I began to really learn Torah. And I'd sit in sermons and I'd soak in information, and I saw people asking questions and people giving answers, and people challenging perspectives, and people interpreting perspectives, and people bringing scripture to refute improper perspectives. And I in my heart, I said, this is what I read about in the New Testament. This is real. This is what a church is supposed to look like. And there was Italian food at Oneg, and that was key for me. I think I'm establishing a pattern about being a foodie. I like to eat. And so, yeah, I kept soaking up stuff, soaking up information and everything. And then, as with like just a week or two of study on Torah, I not really digging in, not really having any sharp answers, but just kind of like a very, very loose grip on it. I was excited, and I says, I need to take this back to everybody in Illinois. All my friends are going to be excited to hear about this truth. I mean, how could they not be excited about this? Like, hey, we found this thing that we're missing. I'm like, hey, you can really understand God a little bit deeper and more intimately in spirit and truth. And isn't this going to be great? Aren't you going to be excited about this? And the answer is no, they're not excited about this, because that's when I learned that most people, maybe not most people, many people, they don't have a relationship with God. They have a relationship with godly things. Maybe. Don't quote me on that, but they have a relationship with the idea of God. They have a relationship with a God that they've made in their minds. They have a relationship with their perception of God. They have a relationship with their pastor's interpretation of God. They don't want to be in God's presence. They want to be in the presence of people who know God so that they can feel by proxy. Kind of like the Israelites at Sinai, and they're like, no, Moses, you go talk to him. He's mad. Let's just get God reflected. Let's get a proxy, an intermediary. And so I went up there and I started sharing about the Torah, and people weren't excited. I was like, surely Pastor Neil loves God. And so we sat down in his house, his new house, and we had a discussion. And this guy had been teaching for years. He'd been a pastor for years, and we kind of deadlocked in a theological conversation. And that really stirred me. That lit a fire in me. Because here I am, not prepared going up against this man who's been doing this for a long time. And we deadlocked. Imagine what it would be like if I actually really understood what I was talking about. Like if I was really prepared for this discussion. And so that's when God inspired me to not be in that situation where I didn't have an answer. Paul says to be ready in season and out of season. So when I came back to Arizona, I started becoming determined to read the scriptures all the way through. So I started Genesis to Revelation, and I was just going through, and I wanted to study out God's law, God's commands. I wanted to study where, if ever, they were discarded, And so as I read, I just kept going down the line, book, and every book I read, I would find a reference to the Torah and about how it is. It's like if the Word of God is a body, then the commands of God, the Torah, have to be the spine, because without it, all the spiritual applications like patience and grace, those are like muscles or nerves that intertwine with the spine that keep you upright. Every subject I studied was coming back to the law of God. You study truth, it comes back to the law of God. Study what is light, and it comes back to the law of light. His word is His law is a lamp upon my feet, a light upon my path. You study what is the word. The word is the Torah. What is good doctrine? This is good doctrine. Do not forsake my law. Everywhere I was going, I was just coming back to this one thing, and it was affirmed in me. I was like, this is the truth. I know that this is true. And this was probably around the time that MySpace was a thing. So, in my zeal, my untempered knowledge and frustration and anger at the concept that, hey, I found a truth and I've been long lied to by certain doctrines, I began to just I became like a Torah terrorist. I was in MySpace threads, Christian groups, and we'd established the law thread, me and a bunch of other people, and then it was like King of a Hill. We'd just march in there and we'd just plant our flag, and then everybody would come running in like, no, the law's been done away with, and try and knock us off the hill, and we'd just start tearing them apart with scriptures, and we're like, nope, this is what it says, heaven and earth will pass away, but not these words, and, well, what about this? And this is like, nope, that's based on elementary teachings of the world. That's not God's teachings are not the principles of the world. They're contrary to that. And we're like, well, what about this and the circumcision? And we're like, oh, well, what about that? That was a group that was a heresy that was arising that said that in order to be saved, you had to do something physically, and that was that you were contributing to salvation, and that's never been the case. Nobody has ever been saved in the history of ever based on anything that they've ever done, with the exception of Christ. Not that he needed saving, but that's a whole nother discussion, I guess. And so we just did that. We just started, taking on anybody that came at us, And I got a little bitter, and I was mad. I was like, because I was lied to. The church lied to me. And I remember one time having a conversation with Pastor Neil. I was sitting in my apartment, and I was mad, and I wanted answers. I wanted to know why Christianity had lied to me, why I had been deceived, and why they didn't tell me the truth from the start, and why aren't they embracing the rest of the commands of God? Why aren't they embracing the truth? How did we forsake all these scriptures, and why have we metaphorically ripped them out of our Bibles and we're teaching people lawlessness? I wanted answers, and I was mad. And Pastor Neil, in a moment of wisdom and grace and integrity, he spoke to me and he said, "You're angry and you're condemning the church by which you came to salvation." And he said, "You wouldn't know any of this if it weren't for the fact that the church reached out to you. And your hostility is misplaced." And it was. I was persecuting the church for not having the answer. And for all their flaws and for all their misconceptions, for people learning bad doctrine and teaching bad doctrine, somewhere along the way, they're doing a lot more Torah than I was at the moment. While they're out there feeding the hungry and clothing the naked, and they're visiting the sick, and as they're sending out missionaries and fulfilling the Great Commission, I was yelling at them because they didn't have the words right. I was persecuting them because they didn't have the complete Torah, even though at the moment they were doing more Torah than I was. And Pastor Neil was right to rebuke me. And so I spent some time searching my heart and how to reconcile that. How do I reconcile church in a place that, how do I reconcile love for the church? I've been at this for hours, so I'm probably going to backtrack and, I don't know, maybe somebody can edit. Probably not. I don't know any editors. I don't even remember where I left off. I think it was when I was living with James and Micah, and then after I'd come back from Illinois, well, there was a part where I felt like I wanted to move back to Illinois. I wanted to take a bunch of resources up there, and I started feeling led to just go into... Man, I am super white. Go into communities and just make friends and love people and try and talk about Torah, So I went up to Illinois, went back to Woodstock Assembly of God, where, Pastor Neil was once the youth pastor, but he had left to start his own church, or a church plant. And there was another guy named Matt there. And I started getting plugged in the church again. But, I'm just casually talking to people about Torah, telling them the truth. And some conversations were going well, like people that understood the scriptures that, nobody's really said anything that just refutes anything that you prevented. Like, nobody's really brought scriptures that counter your perspective. Some people would bring their interpretation of the scripture, like they just throw half-hearted answers in there and be like, well, what you said confuses me, and God is not the author of confusion. Therefore, since I'm confused, I have to reject everything that you say and lean on my own understanding, essentially. And that was fun. So I was having conversations with some people, and some people, they understood what I was saying. They understood that, I was speaking truth. I started helping out with the youth a little bit. And whispers about the things I was talking about was starting to get back to the pastoral staff, getting back to Matt, talking about Torah, and Matt didn't really know what to deal with that, so I remember coming in one night and he says, "Hey, I think we should just read through a book of the Bible." And I thought, "Oh, that's great, man. I got some good, I love just reading scripture." And I was like, so you're thinking like, I don't know, Joshua? I like Joshua. Or, read about Joseph in Genesis or what? And he says, no, I'm thinking New Testament. And I was like, oh, Matthew? Matthew's great. I love the book of John. No, I think we're going to go to the writings of Paul. And I was like, okay, I'm starting to see where this is going. And I was like, okay, what about Ephesians? Ephesians is a good book. I'm like, no, I think we're just going to read Galatians. And I'm like, all right, we're going to read Galatians. So we got this packed room full of young students, and we start reading through Galatians. And we just read through Galatians. And Galatians is one of the books without proper context, without allowing Scripture to define Scripture. It can be interpreted to mean that the law, people can misinterpret it, and as God did away with the Torah, or He did away with His commands, when really what it's saying is a response to Acts 15, where it said some men were teaching this heresy, that in order to be saved you had to do something on your own, and you had some kind of investment in your own salvation. And so we had a bunch of these kids that just read through all of Galatians and heard they heard it without context. So I said, we should read through Acts 15 real quick. And he said, oh, you want to read through Acts next time? I says, well, I have the chapter right here. I'll just read it. And so I read it. And, I explained, I said, all of Galatians, is pertaining to this heresy about circumcision adding to something, and I tried to give qualifications so that everybody who heard the word knew the proper interpretation. Some people had a real big problem with that. Some people had a problem that I challenged the pastor's authority. Other people, students and staff, they said that makes sense. The thing that you said makes sense in proper mindset. It's a way that it actually explains some passages that I've struggled with. So after that, there was a meeting, and I was asked to limit my attendance. And in essence, I was asked not to come back to church. So I got kicked out of the church for Torah, which was the first time I got kicked out of a church for Torah. So I went, and I was attending Pastor Neil's church, and I was attending fellowship, and I was still talking to people, anybody who would listen or have the conversation, who would look at the scriptures themselves being the ultimate authority, and they would go over them or reason with me, like a Berean. Let us rightly divide the word. And so I had conversations. I had materials, and I was sharing with people, and it was getting back to Pastor Neil, and I heard secondhand that Pastor Neil was getting ready to have me leave. I remember having a conversation with him once right before he was getting ready to ask me to leave. He told me about another Messianic community where I might enjoy attending more than his congregation, kind of a Jews for Jesus thing. He said that they meet on Saturdays, and they think the Shabbat is on Saturdays. And I said, well, I'd enjoy attending both places. Yeah, that'd be fun attending both places, and he gave me kind of a look. Out of my respect for Pastor Neil and the understanding that I was about to get kicked out of a second church, I felt like it was time to go home. So I came back to Phoenix. I was attending a community that was no longer being taught by Boaz. Some other people had stepped in. And I just kind of stuck with that for several years, many years, and people came in, people came out, leadership changed, and I watched it drift from one thing into another thing. In my personal experience, there were there were many things I disagreed with leadership-wise. There were many things that really hurt me spiritually, that I had to deal with, that I had to recover from. I got involved in a relationship with one of the people at the church. I tried to do it the whole noble way, go talk to their father and everything and just discuss that. And what he had said initially, he says, you need to wait. Just wait. And this time God used this opportunity to teach me a lot about myself, about my own strength and my own understanding. Because I had every intention of being upright and noble and honest and integritous and what honor means, And I intended on waiting. I really liked this girl, and I intended on waiting before developing a relationship with her. Well, what started out as just a friendship kind of developed into a relationship. And this guy, her father, was actually one of the leaders of the community, and he had a real problem with me. He didn't like me. In his mind, I think I was a man without honor. I was poor. I'm the bigger dude. There was all kinds of reasons why I wasn't good enough for his daughter, and truth be told, maybe I wasn't. I don't know. But I loved her, and we found ourselves in a relationship, and then that created all kinds of drama because we weren't submitting to his authority as a father or as a leader, and he rebuked us, and so we broke up, and my heart was crushed, and I was trying to weigh what it meant to be a man of integrity and honor, and knowing that on my, I thought for sure, I says, I'll never do anything to betray this guy. This guy was something of I saw him as like a mentor. I saw him as, I don't know. I'm sure that there was elements of my own father being gone, and me looking to this man who was a teacher of a community and of men who taught Torah, who appeared to, on the surface, to have everything all together. I looked to him for something that he wasn't willing to give. And it taught me that, taught me the weight of a promise and a weight of the words that I was speaking, because I swore, I was like, I'd never do this, just like Peter, like, I'll never deny you, Messiah. I'll never deny you, Yeshua. Never be. Thinking that I could get something done on my own power and my own strength. And it crushed me. The loss of that relationship of the woman and the mentor and the teacher and the isolation that came from that. Knowing that half the people knew what was going on and the other half, were just kind of like, why is there tension in the community? Why is everything hanging in the air like a knife? And how everything was handled was very not according to Torah. I won't go into all that, but it was just not according to Torah. I'd infracted a little bit, like the not waiting to enter into a relationship. I mean, it wasn't like we were doing anything like incredibly sinful. Like we weren't like getting drunk and sleeping together. Like, no, we held hands and we talked on the phone. And we cared deeply about each other. We wanted to be something, but there was a lot. There was a lot of control issues in that. And as a result of the fallout of that, it did some damage to me, that community. There were other elements. There were several other elements that caused the community to strain and families falling out, which weakened the community structure. And then there was a major issue that I wasn't even involved in that God spared me from that split the community in two. And from the ashes of that, another community was formed, and I was a part of that one. I was really struggling. God was taking me through a period of brokenness, of like deep brokenness, where He was trying to teach me about my lack of strength, and so my health wasn't very good. My sciatica was like, I had sciatica and it was just terrible. Like I couldn't walk. I was limping around everywhere. My back had gone out. My friend at the time, James, had turned his back on God. But he was still my friend at that time, and I was crashing on his couch because I didn't have a place to live. And so I was broken, couldn't hobble to the bathroom. I was living on his couch. I just lost, my community. I'd lost the woman that I cared deeply for, that I was in love with. My family life was kind of rough. And I was really wrestling with God, like Jacob, And I remember in the moment, my life was just in shambles, and I was angry at a lot of things. I was hurting over a lot of things, and I had to ask myself if I wanted to continue any of this. There was just so much pain and so much suffering in those moments, and like Job, James even looked at my life and he was like, "Yeah, you should just curse God and die." Which caused me, to sit there and ask myself if that's really what I wanted to do. Did I want to be done with living? And I wrestled with it for about an hour. I was lying there, and I was thinking to myself, I'm not mad at God. God didn't do anything wrong. My problems were with myself, my own shortcomings. My problems were with this man and his spiritual abuses and his reactions to things, his justified reactions taken into extremes that were abuses. My problem was with separation, but it was never with God. And so I started getting real with God, and I was like, "Hey, your word says to love God and love man, and I can't. I can love you, and that's all I got right now, and you're gonna have to rebuild everything." And God started to rebuild everything. I was taken through a time where He wouldn't let me work. He wouldn't let me work. He kept trying to instill in me the message. He says, you don't provide for yourself. I provide for you. I allow you to work. It's not by your struggle and your power and your might that you are even breathing. It's by my grace that you stand. And so through this period of unemployment, I'd have like $10 in my pocket, and I'd buy food, and it would be the last day of my money, and I'd have like $1 left, and I'd just look up to God, and I was like, "God, I don't have any money left. You've got to do something." And then the very next day, somebody would knock on my door from a friend of mine and says, "Hey, I need help installing a mister system in my house, so come work with me. I'll pay you some money, and I'll feed you lunch." And I was like, "Fantastic." And so they'd feed me lunch, and I had a little bit more money in my pocket. Or I'd go through a period of time where I'd run out of money, and then I was like, "God, I have no food, but you're the one that provides." And somebody they'd call me up like, "Hey, I need help moving, and if you help me move, I'll buy you lunch." And so God just kept coming through and sustaining me, like the Israelites in the wilderness, I don't know where the meals are going to come from, but my phone would ring, and there'd be men on the other end, or there'd be a knock on my door, and there'd be sustenance. And he just continued to bless me in that. So that went on for a while. That went on for some time. During this time, I had the wisdom of men being spoken over me. They had, telling me, you need to get a job. You don't have a job. You need to be beating down doors, and you need to make jobs appear. You need to make stuff happen. And God was teaching me a lesson in this, because he was saying, like, though, yes, a man that shouldn't work shouldn't eat, God was also saying that the world is going to tell you all kinds of things that sound true and have elements of truth, and they're going to tell you all kinds of things that you think you should be doing, but what you're supposed to be doing is listening to me. They're not your life. They're not your God. They're working out their own salvation with fear and trembling, but I have you where I have you until I tell you to move. And I was imagining, Peter in the boat when he had his eyes on Yeshua. He's walking on water and he's doing the thing that shouldn't work. Being unemployed was me getting out of the boat, and God continually providing as I put my eyes on him. And the conventional wisdom of the world was just coming at me like, splashing over me like waves, like, you need to do this other thing, you need to do this, the wisdom that I have now. And I listened to God. I'd put in applications here and there every now and again, because eventually I knew that God was going to let me go back to work. But I knew that it was God that had to do the thing. And consistently, he's like, not yet, not until I'm sure you get this. I remember once ago during that time, we were sitting there in camp, and I'm going around from campsite to campsite, and I'm talking to folks and doing security, because that's my gig, that's my jam. And I was talking with my brother, and my brother decided he was going to lay into me he was going to set me straight, because I think to some degree he was embarrassed that, that I wasn't where he thought I should be in life. I wasn't working the way he thought I should work. And so he started yelling at me, and he started laying into me to the point that, like, I was just overcome with, like, tears. Like, it really emotionally hurt me. And it drove me out of the camp crying. And as soon as I walked out of the camp, like, out of the entire camp, and I was just sobbing before God, some crazy stuff happened. Like, he told me about it. He says the second you left camp, a wild boar charged through his camp and just started tearing stuff up. And then his wife tripped and fell, and his baby fell down, and he couldn't, then, like, my brother-in-law had a seizure, and then, like, there was just this mighty gust of wind that just started blowing everything everywhere. And it was just one thing after another until I came back into camp, and we had a conversation about, like, a heart-to-heart about, where I'm at with God and what was going on with me, and about how, even though he was given brotherly advice and he wants what he wants for me, I have to do what God says. I have to be obedient to him first. And that's not going to look like me being patterned after Cain, So, there's a lot there, a lot of brokenness, a lot of healing. So, eventually, God, I'm telling God, I was like, God, I'm going to need a car. I'm going to need a car. I'm going to need a job, and you're going to be the one that has to provide these things. And so God's like, all right, we'll do what we do, So I'm scouting out Craigslist, and I'm just kind of keeping my eyes open. And as God's just trickling money in here and there, I'm just sticking it in a box over on my dresser until He says it's all right, you know. And so next thing I know, I've got like $500 in there. And with Craigslist, I know you can get a decent, a running car in Phoenix for $500. It's not gonna be pretty, but it'll work. And so I'm praying. I was like, all right, God, I think I have enough for a car. So you've got to make it happen. So I call on a car, it's gone. I call on another car, it's gone. I call on another car. Yep, just missed it. Just sold it. So I was like, okay, God, you've got the one picked out. You've got to make it so it's it's ready. And so I keep squirreling away money. Next thing I know, I have $700. That's for a guy to have $700 who doesn't have a job is kind of something. It's going pretty well. And just squirreling in money, focusing on him, doing odd jobs here and there. And I finally have, I'm still calling on cars, they're gone. And then every car I called on, it was gone for, like a month. Until I had $900. I had $900 saved up, And so I got on Craigslist and I looked at a car, and it was a black Ford Escort ZX2. And I called the guy and I said, hey, you got this car available? And he says, yeah, but it's going to go fast, so get here soon. I was like, oh, it's there. And just then I called my sister, and my sister was just approaching the off-ramp next to my house. And I said, hey, can you give me a ride to this car, to take a look at this car? So she swung by and picked me up, and we went to go look at this vehicle. And it looked all right, had the check engine light on, but it ran okay, and the tires were bald. But I really felt compelled. I was like, this is the car. And he was asking $900, and so I was praying about it, and I was like, this is the car. And so I asked him. I said, hey, we take $800. And he looked me in the eye, and he goes, yeah, let me show you something. And he pulls out this paper, because he had gotten it from an auto auction. And he pulls out this piece of paper, and he says, let me show you something. And he shows me the price that he paid for the car. And the price that he paid for the car was $793. And he was selling it to me for $800. He made $7 profit off of that deal. And I'm like, that's God. Because anybody who went through all that hassle, it's got to be, God working in my favor. And it was a good car. Well, I got a job doing security at a mall, and it was funny because I'm still under the strong impression that God provides for me. It's not me and myself. And so I had an interview, and the guy, I explained to him, I was like, look, I'm trying to keep Sabbath, and I keep, Torah, and so I can't work Friday night or Saturday. And so he says, that's fine, no problem. And he decides to give me the job. So I'm excited. Well, I go through the guard licensing thing, which God pays for, provides for. And I show up to the office, and I'm doing my job, doing the training, and it's a Friday morning, and I'm like, hey, when do I come back? And my training officer says, yeah, you come back tomorrow. And I says, I explained in the interview that I can't do that I don't do that. I got hired for a full-time position, mind you. And I explained to him, I says, I don't work Saturdays. And I was hired with that condition. So she said, well, you're going to have to go into the office and explain that to the boss. The boss's name was Roy. And so I go into the office, and it's this tiny office with this oversized desk that takes up most of the room. And this guy is trying to intimidate me. But I'm not intimidated. He's trying to put it to me. He's like, yeah, you're just going to come back tomorrow. And I says, hey, I told you that I can't do that. That I was hired for, under the conditions that I don't work on the Sabbath. And so he sits there for a few minutes staring at the calendar on the wall, and he's trying to make it so uncomfortable that I cave under the pressure. But I don't cave under the pressure. So we sit there, and I kid you not, we sit there for 10 minutes in awkward silence as he's staring at the calendar, waiting for me to change my mind about the Sabbath. But little does he know that I've just came from unemployment, like not having a paycheck, and God is consistently provided for me for months on end. So this guy, he's not my savior. He's not the one that provides for me. God is the one that provides for me. And I need to obey God first and foremost over men. That was the lesson God was taking me through. So finally he says, all right, come back Monday. So I come back Monday, and instead of having the full-time position, he said that was filled, and he gave me 10 hours a week, 2 days, 2 5-hour shifts, like Monday and Thursday, in hopes that just having so few hours, I'd end up quitting. But I was faithful with that. I kept showing up for work on time. I kept doing my job. When anybody wanted a day off, I showed up and I covered for them. This went on for about 2 months. And then Roy was fired because he had an affair with one of his employees, and word got back to corporate headquarters about all the stuff he was doing, so they got bounced out of there. And a new guy named Rod came in. I don't know what it is with supervisors and 3-letter R names, but there it was. It was Roy, and then there was Rod. And Rod saw that I was dedicated. He saw that I was, I was working hard, that I was faithful, and as soon as a full-time position opened up, he gave it to me. And I worked that for several months, and then the company switched from one company to another, but we were all staying on at the post. So this was going to create a supervisor position, and he offered it to me. So in 8 months, I went from 10 hours a week to a supervisor position, and God was continuing to bless me. I was still going to church. I was still having problems with, people that didn't want to get resolution on things. There wasn't really restoration. There was a lot of verbal sweeping under the rug, a lot of just dismissing of transgressions. There was a lot of holding people to standards that they themselves did not hold to. There was times when you'd ask leadership questions like, "Hey, why is this going on?" And instead of like giving an account for accountability, they'd deflect and surround themselves with intermediaries to keep leadership from being questioned, and then they'd start ramping up sermons saying that you can't come against the Lord's anointed because any accusation brought against leadership is Korah's rebellion, which is when somebody's in sin, you have the right to call them out. You have the right to question it. You have a right to. I don't care if you're the pastor of a church. I don't care if you're just coming in fresh off the street. You have compassion for what you have compassion. But if somebody's perpetuating transgressions upon people and not being held accountable, then that breeds sickness in the church. That fosters dysfunction. And that was not being dealt with no matter how many times it was being brought up. There was one time where there was a situation where they were talking about not doing Sukkot at all. And I was like, well, the commandment is to not forsake the assembling of yourselves, and that we are supposed to, have Sukkot and read the Torah in everybody's presence. And when they were talking about not doing Sukkot, I was part of the discussion, and they said, well, just pray about it, and then, just get back to us. What I gathered from the events that happened is pray about it and get back to us really meant, I'm telling you that I don't want to do Sukkot for my reasons, and what I'd like is for you all to fall in line and just kind of sycophantically just go along with whatever I say. But I misinterpreted that. What I interpreted that I was literally pray and then get back to him. So I went home and I tried to sleep, and I was lying in bed and I was trying to sleep. And God just kept stirring in my heart. He's like, no, go fire off an email. And so I tried to be humble about it. Like, hey, I know you guys, you're leadership, I am not. You get to do, you're going to do whatever it is that you do. But I just, from my perspective and my 2 cents, is this is what the Word says. This is what the Holy Spirit is telling me. And He's not letting me sleep right now unless I say something. So I'm saying something. And instead of that being handled accordingly, like, hey, okay, we've heard your concerns. We disagree. We're going to go a different direction. Suddenly, it was being spoken that I was trying to usurp the authority of leadership, that I was not in leadership, that I was trying to elevate my position. It was just more. It was more garbage and more damage. It was more spiritual abuses and more dysfunction. I was getting real tired of everything. And I was praying about God. I was like, God, if there's somewhere to go, I think you need to get me out of here. It was about that time that, I had accrued some vacation time, and I was asking God, hey, where can I go on vacation? Because I had paid vacation. I'd never had paid vacation before. And so I put it out on Facebook, and some friends up here in Washington said, hey, if you come up here, you can crash on our couch. I said, well, if you're serious about that, I'll come up here and crash on your couch. So I went from Phoenix, Arizona to Spokane, Washington, from heat that was 120 degrees to 70-degree weather, where I was sitting out on the back patio of my friend Brett's porch, staring up at a crystal clear blue sky, sipping a beer, watching deer walk through his yard, instead of standing in 120-degree weather, staring down at the rocks, watching scorpions wander around, and it's just, who would want to live there? And I started culminating, all my thoughts, gathering together, and I was, praying about it. It's like, I think I'm done being in the desert. I think I'm done with the dysfunction, and I think I need to separate from this place of toxicity. And, I was asking God about that, and things seem to be, yes, this is a good thing. This is I'm going to bless you as you move forward in this. So I came back from vacation, and with the intention that every move I was going to make was going to be towards getting up to Washington as fast as possible. So within 2 months, I moved to Washington. Brought my mom up. We had a whole moving truck. Got up here. God would just pave the way. I had a job when I first showed up, what I'm doing now, which is hospital security. Had a place to live. I bought a truck, SUV, whatever. I call it a truck. And He's just been continuing to bless me. And I'd never been humbled in the way that He humbled me when I first got here, where you screw up and God comes down on you hard, it'll humble you. But when He just overwhelmingly showers you with blessings and just openings of doors, and it was so much that it brought me to tears several times, because I found myself driving in my car and just staring at the trees and the wind blowing through my window, and the beauty of it all, and just like talking with God. And I remember crying and like trying to think. I was like, did I die somewhere along the way? Is this heaven? I feel like I would have remembered dying, because this is This is so free. And it was like I had left 200 pounds of weight fall from my shoulders just by leaving the city behind. And it wasn't that I was running from anything, because I'd waded through a bunch of garbage trying to get resolution, and when resolution was dead set on not being had, it came time to walk away. And I put down things that were no longer mine to carry, and I felt free. That God brought me into a place of peace and understanding. And He started working on my heart and on some things, some areas of pain and long-standing hurt. Started doing some. He started, I felt like God was trying to tell me. He says, "Hey, you need to take a year off." When I first got here, I went to a Messianic community and to check it out, and they seemed like nice enough folk, but God just really seemed to be impressing upon my heart that was not the direction that I needed to be in for that time. So I took a year off from church. I did a lot of home study and a lot of just healing, detoxifying my heart and my mind from a lot of broken things. I did a lot of reading. I read a book called Toxic Faith by Stephen Otterburden and Jack something. I can never remember the names, but it's good. It's the guy that did Every Young Man's Battle and stuff. And that book brought a lot of healing and understanding in my life, and I highly recommend it to anybody who chooses to read it. Anybody who's ever suffered spiritual abuse, anybody who thinks that, hey, there's something not quite right in my community, and I'm not sure if it's me or not, read the book. Anybody who struggles with codependency or has been a victim of abuse from narcissism, read the book. Read the book. Read the book. And then one morning, it was morning in January, I woke up and God just said, "Hey, go back to church today." I just woke up. I woke up some Sunday morning and God's like, "Go to church today." And I didn't know where to go. I was like, okay. So I went to, there was a church around the corner that used to be a part of a strip mall or the movie theater or something, and it's called Southside. So I went in there and I started to get plugged in there. It's a Christian church, non-denominational Christian church. And I was there for a while. I was there for about a year or two. I think it was 2 years. I was there for 2 years. My sister had moved up and my mother were up here, and just as soon as I started going to church, they all decided that they were going to move back to Phoenix. And they were going to kind of just leave me up here on my own. And so I was dealing with that, but I had made a few friends that were good people, and they kind of helped me through just everybody's up and leaving again time. So everybody up and left, and I got in an argument with my mom about it. I'm like, what is it with this family that just always just kind of, they can't stick anywhere, they can't stay anywhere, they just gotta leave. So that was a little rough conversation. We've worked that out since then. But as soon as my family left, my granny died, my dad's mom. Oh, there was the part where my aunt died when I was about 16. She went in for a routine colonoscopy, had an adverse reaction to the anesthetic. Somehow that put her into a vegetative state, and she was on life support. She had a lot of health problems. And so I remember going into the hospice where they were pulling the plug on her, and they took her off ventilation, and I watched her struggle to breathe as she died. Which that was a rough thing. So I watched my father die. I watched my aunt die. I've seen a couple people die in my life, and ideally I wouldn't have had to see anybody die in my life, but the number's more than two, and it's kind of messed up. So I was dealing with that, just going to church. My mom came back. My sister came back the following year. My sister Lori and I, we've been estranged for a long time because drug use, and she just never really showed up. Every time we planned to meet up or talk or hang out or get to know each other, she'd always cancel the plans. There was one time she left me in an Applebee's for like a good solid 3 hours before she let me know she wasn't coming, and it was tough. I'd call her every now and again, like every couple of years, try and track down her number because she never called me. She was always just doing her thing. I tried to share with her the truth, the gospel, what salvation actually is, because she worshipped the stars and she worshipped, the universe and her ideas of science and what have you. I tried to share with her the truth, but I don't know if she ever accepted it. She called back in February. She said she was having trouble. She was in Biloxi, Mississippi, and she needed to get out. She said she was worried she was going to die. And so my sister Jasmine and I, we told her, says, give us an address and we'll come get you. Tell us where you are and we'll come get you. And she didn't want to give us an address. And so we told her, it was like, okay, get to a shelter, get to a woman's shelter, get to the bus station, we'll call, we'll purchase you a ticket, we'll get you out of there, just go. She was part of a domestic violence situation, and she had a history of drug and alcohol abuse that resulted, in my niece being taken away. And she's now part of the California foster care system. Lori's mother knows where she is, but they changed her name to Zoe, I think, or Zoe. Was Glory. And we tried to reason with Lori, but she didn't really want out. My mom had talked to her about getting help with chemical dependency, and she cussed out my mom, and she got really angry at her. And so that was really the last time we ever talked to her. Got word a couple weeks back, about 3 weeks ago, that she was in a hospital, that something had happened, that she was part of a domestic violence situation where she went into the hospital, she'd walked in, and she'd said that she had fell because she was being carried in by her significant other, Bobby. Bobby Lewis of Biloxi, Mississippi. He murdered my sister, by my understanding. And so he was right there, so she said that, she fell. She was covered in bruises, and she slipped into a coma. She had cocaine in her system. She had kidney problems and liver failure, and she never recovered from the coma. Contacting the police, we found out that they'd been out that house several times for domestic violence, but nothing ever came of it. And I've been dealing with the grief from that. And there have been people who have said, hey, it's okay that maybe she accepted God. that don't be mad at God. I'm not mad at God. I'm not mad at God. God didn't rail against himself. Lori railed against God. She's the one that continually spat in his face, and she's the one that continually mocked him and continually chose to believe the lies instead of the truth. She's the one that continually chose not to get help. She's the one that chose not to repent. And I think that as hard as it is to say, that it still brings God glory to say, enough. I'm going to take you out of life rather than allow this situation to perpetuate, to keep going, rather than allow it to keep getting worse and affect more and more lives. Or whatever the case. God said you're done. I think that God took my father when I was a kid, because if he hadn't, I probably would have followed in his footsteps in addiction, and I would have been an alcoholic. There was one time my mom was picking me up from my dad's house, and my dad was drinking a beer, and they started arguing with each other, and they was getting pretty heated. And my mom got in the car, and I got in the car, and he's yelling at her, and she's backing out, and he jumped on the hood of the car, and he just started spitting beer everywhere. And my mom's freaking out, and she's like, "Mike, what the hell are you doing?" And he said, "I'm cleaning your windshield." Which, this whole domestic violence type situation is really messed up. It's really messed up, but 7-year-old me thought that was the funniest thing. He's just spitting beer on the hood of the car as we're backing out, and "I'm cleaning your windshield." That was wrong. So, I don't know. That brings us about up to date. I mean, that's my life. That's where God's brought me. That's where I'm muddling through. That's where I'm prevailing. That's where I've fallen short. I promised a lot of people that I'd do an extended one. It's not a 30-second video in the car while I'm at work. And this took all day. I had plans to watch some good TV, but here I am for 3 hours. So there it is. May the Lord bless you and keep you.